Now, allow me to give again the word to Father Bob, because now we need your reflection. I mean, first of all, you spoke in behalf of Bishop Kwashi. Now we want to listen to you. Thank you.
Yes, I think I'm a poor substitute for Archbishop Kwashi. I'll be myself now. I'll just say a few words about research that I've conducted on the Christian responses to persecution in Kenya, in Nigeria, and in Sudan. First of all, I'll just say very briefly that we really do have two different types of persecution taking place in these countries. In Kenya and Nigeria, we have societal level persecution. As Cardinal Onaiyekan mentioned, there are these groups, Boko Haram in Nigeria, which we have learned so much about over the past few years, and Al-Shabaab, which has become very active in Kenya. And in Sudan, we have state-sponsored or state-sanctioned persecution. Just to give you some sense of the devastation that has taken place in northeastern Nigeria, since the Boko Haram insurgency began in around the year 2002, there have been over 13,000 people killed, and in the year 2013, it's said that more than 6,000 people were killed, and that's more than ISIS is responsible for. Over 1 million refugees in Nigeria, many of them displaced. I should say 1 million displaced people, over 1 million displaced people in Nigeria. Many of them displaced because of interreligious violence and also the Boko Haram insurgency. Many of them Christians, but we also certainly find Muslims among the displaced. Over 200,000 refugees, Nigerian refugees in Chad and Cameroon because of the Boko Haram insurgency. So a very devastating situation for the people of northeastern Nigeria. In Kenya, we really don't have official numbers, and we don't have as many people displaced, but we do know that Al-Shabaab has been quite active, and like Boko Haram, has killed people simply on the basis of their religious identity. In both countries, these groups, Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, they basically ask people to recite the Shahada, and if they can't do it, in many cases, they are killed on the spot, especially men. And women are often taken as captives. Anyway, just kind of paint the scene. In Sudan, we find persecution has increased in intensity since the creation of South Sudan in 2011. The message has been sent by the government, very basically, that Christians cannot be truly Sudanese. And now, since South Sudan has been created, Christians should leave. They should go to South Sudan if they want to worship freely, if they want the freedom to exercise their religion. Churches have been demolished, destroyed. Government often has refused to give permits for the construction of new churches. Christians make up a very tiny percentage of Sudan, about 2% of the population. Many of them are in Khartoum or in the south, near the border with South Sudan. And many of them just keep their heads down. In other words, they're responding essentially by enduring and coping with the situation. And they're reaching out, of course, to the global Christian community for support. How have Christian communities been responding in Nigeria and in Kenya? I mean, of course, many ordinary Christians have fled, especially in Nigeria, the northeast, and they end up on church compounds in the Diocese of Yola in Nigeria. In the Diocese of Yola in Nigeria, there were as many as 2,500 displaced on the Catholic Cathedral grounds, St. Teresa's Catholic Cathedral in Yola. But many of them have sought refuge with friends and with family members in the south. So ordinary Christians have responded by fleeing, by running away in northeastern Nigeria for the most part. Church leaders have been responding in three ways. I mean, it's important to recognize that, as Cardinal Onaiyekan mentioned, that Christian leaders do not always see the conflict in the same way, or to see the problem in the same way, or to agree on the best way to respond. But in my research, the interviews I conducted, there seems to be a consensus. First of all, what emerged was the importance of ecumenical efforts. Now, this is true in both Kenya and in Nigeria, that Christian leaders have been coming together like never before. And many Christian leaders talked about Protestant leaders talked about how they had very little to do with Catholics until this emergency and the persecution started to intensify. The Christians coming together to speak with one voice and to decide on how best to respond. Also, interfaith resiliency. There's this attempt in both Kenya, northeastern Kenya, and in northeastern Nigeria to bring Christian and Muslim leaders together to build resiliency in communities. There seemed to be a consensus among Christian leaders that in both countries, actually, in Kenya and Nigeria, that Boko Haram is a symptom of a problem, and that Al-Shabaab's successful recruiting of Kenyans into their ranks is also the symptom of a deeper problem, a problem that requires an interfaith solution, interreligious solution, to address the problem of extreme poverty in the northeast of Nigeria and in the northeast of Kenya. So many Christian leaders talked about how they didn't think that ultimately, finally, this is about a religion, even though religious rhetoric is certainly used, and even though Christians are killed simply because of their Christian identity. That ultimately, finally, these groups recruit successfully because of a marginalization and a lack of human development in the northeastern regions of both of the countries. And as the address by Archbishop Kwashi made clear, there's a consensus, even though there's some disagreement, and some Christians have organized themselves to defend their communities with force. There's consensus that it's important to engage government so that government makes more informed policy to address the problems of Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in particular. There's consensus that a nonviolent response is the only truly Christian response. Although there may be a role for force, that there has been too much force used, and it's been indiscriminate, and it's made matters worse in both northeastern Nigeria and in northeastern Kenya. That the government's response has been reactive, not proactive, and has relied too heavily on the use of force. And that this makes matters worse not only in the short term, but especially in the long term, because it plays into a narrative that the extremist groups like to promote, that Muslims are under attack, right, by Christian-dominated, in Kenya anyway at the moment, a Christian-dominated central government, and that there is a war, and that people should join them in this war against the central government and against the Christians. So there's consensus that that among Christian leaders in both Nigeria and in Kenya, that the government's response must be more measured, it must be smarter, it must be more proactive, and it should be less forceful and less indiscriminate in its use of force. So I think I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to use the last 5 minutes we have asking a question to the three distinguished guests of this morning. My question is Pope Francis' visit in Africa helping the persecuted Christians, and how?
Cette visite a été ressentie surtout comme une bénédiction. Une bénédiction parce que c'est un pays qui a connu beaucoup de temps de violence, de vengeance. Et donc la venue du pape a autorisé les cœurs à espérer un changement, un retournement de cœur, une démarche de réconciliation avec entre les partis divisés. Alors, tous les chrétiens qui, depuis le début, ont commencé à lutter pour que la réconciliation puisse être réelle et qui connaissent des obstacles réels aussi, ont vu les démarches du pape comme vraiment une bénédiction qui leur permet de continuer ce travail. Le pape, en venant, a d'abord commencé à la cathédrale de Bangui, mais aussi il est parti à l'église protestante, il est parti à la mosquée, et il a salué tout le monde, il a prié avec tous les chrétiens et les musulmans également. Donc c'est un début de travail qu'il a commencé et que nous devons continuer.
Thank you. Eminence.
I am glad that Father Bernard, who was able to answer your question, because the Pope visited their country. Let me tell you frankly, we in Nigeria are still waiting for our own Pope's visit. And we did, many Nigerians say, how can the Pope go to Central Africa and won't come to the giant of Africa? And I tell them, be patient. You can't handle the giant like you're handling the ants. But the message of the Pope in all these countries, we are trying to also make sure it resonates in our country. Because generally, the Pope doesn't speak only to the country it goes to. The speeches and so on are expected to go around the whole of Africa and maybe the whole world. But this is taking time for us to spread the message while we are waiting anxiously for our own visit to Nigeria. But little things I want to mention briefly. The question of refugees, or we call them in Nigeria IDPs, internally displaced people. You know, in Nigeria, we have millions of IDPs. Nobody is talking of refugees because they are not running away to other countries. Our country is big enough to swallow to absorb everybody. And even within Nigeria, the majority of displaced people don't go to camps. They are staying with their friends and relations in different parts of the country. As far as Christians are concerned, when the problem exploded in the northeast, the southern Christians who lived in the north, Igbos, Yorubas, and so on, they escaped home. They went to their home, to their villages where they originally come from. So therefore, they went back home. They cannot be considered as refugees who are hanging in foreign environments. And the people who suffered are the Christians who are indigenous of the north, who have no home to run to. They are the ones who that qualify as IDPs. Most of them living with their relations, some ending up in and around the church premises because the government camps for refugees was not found safe for them because the government camp for refugees was full of Muslims. There's the whole issue of numbers. Nigeria is famous of completely ignoring statistics. Yeah, we don't even know how many we are. We are just saying we are 170 million. We may be 200, we may be 150, nobody knows. But even the question of refugees, we don't know the exact number, nor do we know how many Christians and how many Muslims. But guesstimates states, because this area is largely Muslim, the Muslim refugees are far more numerous than the Christian refugees. Similarly, those who have been killed, more Muslims have been killed than Christians. But generally, when Muslims kill Muslims, we say, no problem, they are killing themselves. And there are Christians who, in fact, consider that as a sign that God is actually intervening on behalf of Christians by getting them kill one another. But Christ did not teach us that way. Interfaith and the interreligious and Interestingly, the interesting thing that's happening in Nigeria is that the activities of Boko Haram has put a lot of pressure on our ecumenical relations, because we have not been able to agree on how to deal with the Muslims, which eventually makes it difficult for us to continue the line of interfaith relationship. It is interesting to note that it was difficult for us to convince my fellow Christians, especially the Protestants, who were rejoicing that finally in Central African Republic, the Christians have decided to take the bull by the horn, arm themselves, and face these Muslims. That is how they interpreted anti-Balaka. I am glad to hear from you who are on the ground that I was correct when I told them that the anti-Balaka are not a Christian militia. They have not been put together by the bishops. They were not armed by any church organization, not by Missio or Miserio or CROS. They didn't know about this whole question that these are just people who just gathered themselves together to defend themselves.
Thank you.